Girls, you guys didn't have to enter a password, did you? No. Okay, girls, we're just waiting for our adjudicators. Yeah, they're coming. And just know you guys are on the live stream now, okay? Okay, we have 4 Roseville girls. We have 4 Pymble girls. Do we have 3 adjudicators? We've got Georgia, we've got Kitty and Cecilia. Fantastic. Okay, so as I said before, we're on the live stream now. Apologies for that minor glitch. It'll be in speaker mode, so just the speaker speaking will speak. I'll let Georgia do the kind of preamble. Please leave your videos on during the debate. Treat it like a face-to-face. Okay, Georgia, over to you.
Hello everyone, welcome to the grand final for the Junior Division Debating for Festival of Speech 2021. Congratulations to both teams for making it this far. In today's debate, we have the affirmative team from Roseville and the negative is Pymble. The topic for today's debate is that we should ban the use of literature that reinforces traditional gender roles in school. Can I get some nods from speakers? We're all on the same page with that? Awesome. The speaking time for this division is 4 minutes. There'll be 1 clap at 3, 2 claps at 4. At 4:30, I will unmute and I will say something along the lines of, "Speaker, your time has expired." I would encourage you all to time yourself because I know sometimes the audio doesn't cut in very well. I'll also put fingers up like this at 3 and 4, but just so I would encourage you all to time yourselves. If anyone has any questions, now would be the time to ask, but we're all good? Okay, great. Well then, without further ado, I invite the first affirmative speaker to begin this debate.
Thank you. The books we have read have a high impact on the way we see the world, and the values shown throughout literature have had a timeless and long-lasting impact. The texts we learn in schools are crucial to forming the worldview of impressionable students as they educate us on multiple aspects about both the world and humanity. However, books with outdated and offensive gender roles are still being taught in classrooms and are still influencing the beliefs of children of the traditional gender stereotypes, such as the domestication of women. Even though this number may be lesser, the profound impact these books have on students is detrimental, and the views they affirm have no place in our society, and our literature should reflect this. So our model is that by 2024, in all of Australia, all schools will ban the use of literature that reinforces outdated traditional gender roles, for example, female passivity, from being taught in classes or available in libraries. We define reinforce as the author actively voicing support for traditional gender roles, but not books critiquing or discussing gender roles. So gender roles can still be discussed in the classroom, but with a critical mindset. So by reducing the exposure of messages of support to these outdated patriarchal beliefs and replacing them with texts of increasing diversity, including Eastern literature and authors of people of colour, that more reflect the values of today. This will be done by NESA when developing the English curriculum for students and will be enforced by the schools. So tonight I'll be talking about the benefits of banning these traditional books, and my second speaker will be talking about the benefits of more diverse books replacing these traditional ones, and my third speaker will sum up our case. So now to my first piece of substantive about the benefits of banning these traditional books. So by banning these books that reinforce harmful gender stereotypes, the Australian government is making a very powerful and symbolic statement that we no longer support enforced gender roles. And this is a message that is so important that all schools should be taught it. It shows that these views have no place in our society and should not be held by individuals. So banning these books that tend to be more traditionally positively impacts two main stakeholders who have historically experienced severe oppression in society. The first one being women who have been entrapped in societal expectations, for example, what it means to make the perfect life for their husband. Throughout history, they have expected to be meek and submissive, and this is reflected in texts of the time. For example, Angel of the House by Coventry Patmore is a text that affirms the submissity and obedience of women. He refers to throughout the text that women should be meek, obedient, and devoted to their husbands. This can be extremely harmful in teaching to children, as first it may not be introduced as critical to these students, instead using it for something like analysing techniques. But even if it is introduced as critical, the values these once held are still impressionable on these children. And showing children that this is once accepted by society without question and without deep and proper analysis and communication can send conflicting messages about normalising and enforcing these gender roles. The second group that has been historically marginalised by society is gender fluid and non-binary people and any other people who identify to be part of the LGBTQ+ community. These people have been continuously marginalised and prosecuted throughout human history and have consequently not been represented in these texts. This is detrimental to these individuals because their voices are omitted from both literature and society. They are also not represented or portrayed in these texts as acceptable members of society, which is simply untrue and is a view that is not and should not be held. By banning books that approve of these narrow-minded gender roles, we as a society are recognising the suffering that women and LGBTQ people experience. This is a symbol of us as a society rejecting these harmful views and acknowledging the hurt that these oppressive views have caused in the past. We are also preventing these views to continue to be taught on the impressionable youth, which may be subconsciously affected by these views being taught in an affirming way. Instead, this can be presented in texts that have critique about these outdated views, and instead put on texts that affirm diversity, which will be elaborated on by my second speaker. So as I said with the example, Coventry Patmore's Angel in the House wouldn't be allowed under our model, but a text that would be allowed would be poems by Robert Browning, which critique the gender roles within patriarchal society. As the affirmative, we believe that our model poses many long-term future benefits to help us shape our society to a more accepting place as children are able to criticise the gender roles they see in their own lives. By not being taught literature that praises or reinforces gender stereotypes, but only including ones that criticise these roles, we are ensuring that students do not subconsciously get the wrong message and enact on these messages that they are being taught in the negative as well.
Therefore, your time has expired.
They're having a more accepting worldview, and that's why I'm proud to affirm.
I thank the first affirmative for the speech, and I welcome the first negative speaker to begin the negative team's case.
Thank you. So in contemporary society, children are studying important literary text that provides the foundation for our English curriculum and in many ways our perspective of gender roles in modern society. As a negative team in tonight's debate, we believe that it is essential for students' education to be exposed to the themes in these books that involve these traditional gender roles in schools to ensure that they learn about these issues raised in these books in a way that can shape both their moral and academic education. But before I begin my speech, I would like to point out some flaws in the opposition's case. So I've identified two main flaws in the opposition's case. So on the first question of, does banning these books in school effectively teach about gender roles and this whole concept of being inclusive to LGBTQ and historically oppressed people? Well, we'd firstly like to point out that by teaching these books in schools, we are not actively trying to enforce these gender roles. In fact, Australians are taught and raised in a society where we actively break against these gender norms, and you can even see these in our ad campaigns and other things. So what we think is actually happening is that this comparative study from history towards today's values shows how much we've had to do to campaign against these values that I'll expand on later in my speech. And the braveness of these people who have actually in the past and in these pieces of literature have actually had the courage to fight against these stereotypes and these archetypes and to break out of these traditional gender roles that have been forced on them. And so the literature, and even if this isn't apparent in the literature that students are being taught, when it's taught, it's not praising this behavior, as the purpose of writing these and studying these books is a commentary on society at the time and the skewed values of that society. So secondly, do these books still hold value, and what message do these books leave with children? So the opposition stated that these books teach children outdated gender roles, and we agree, but it's the way that it's taught and the curriculum ensures that children are taught to analyse and combat these outdated ideas, and teachers nor students idealise these negative values, as the opposition has phrased as, so they're not leaving this negative impact on children. So as the first speaker of the negative team, I will be talking about the importance of the comparative studies that take place in books with the gender roles and the many lessons we can learn from them. And my second speaker will be talking about how exposing children to this literature in a controlled environment ensures that they learn this content properly, and the importance of these books in shaping moral educations. So now onto my case. Firstly, it's essential that we continue to teach these books that involve the use of traditional gender roles in schools. So what's happening currently? Well, in the status quo, teachers are having the opportunity to expose their students to these gender roles and stereotypes within pieces of literature, and they are exposing students consequently to the progression of gender roles throughout history, the many sacrifices that have been made to get to this point, and how we can move forward in the future. And we believe that many of these books that enforce these gender roles will often have their main characters somewhat subverting the archetype that has been forced on them. However, even books that involve the reinforcement of these traditional stereotypes and that aren't subverted throughout the book, it usually becomes increasingly apparent throughout these texts of the harmful impacts of reinforcing these stereotypes. So many of these books were written as a statement on society of the time, and even if they do not explicitly have characters subverting the gender roles, students can see the inherent wrongness that is caused by this. And so what will happen if we ban these books reinforcing these gender roles from being taught in schools? Well, we think that if we don't teach these texts, we are somewhat desensitizing students to the subject matter and the extremely important comparisons that we can make from how society used to function and how it functions now. By skirting away from addressing these gender roles in the past through our studies in school, we make it seem like they weren't big issues that required a lot of literature written about them at the time to express views and to document history, and would be undermining the importance of these texts and the root cause of the gender issues in society today that have been shaped by these events. So my second point is that if we ban this literature, we are losing a lot of important books that have other important lessons we can learn from them. So what books fall under this category? Well, we believe that many of these books were actually a product of their context, or they were written in certain times when certain beliefs were normalized. So even though these books have elements that are considered controversial in our modern setting, it doesn't negate the important lessons we learn from these books, despite the content they contain. So the first scenario is that they reinforce traditional stereotypes, such as in The Taming of the Shrew, the whole play is about a man making an obedient wife. However, this doesn't mean that the schools are teaching this play and praising the characters' actions and encouraging them to do the same. Rather, they are cohesively dissecting the reason why these actions are wrong and explaining how these stereotypes came to be and why they are bad. And the second scenario is that it contains elements of traditional gender stereotypes. This isn't the main focus, and there are themes that can be learned.
Your time has expired.
Oh, so for these reasons, I'm proud to affirm. Negate.
I thank the first negative speaker for her speech, and I now invite the second affirmative speaker to continue the debate. Okay, sorry.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My first speaker has stepped through why it's imperative that we ban the use of literature that enforces gender roles, but I will explain in depth the myriad of benefits that new literature replacing the old will bring. because we as the Affirmative believe that the voices of marginalized communities such as the LGBTQ, people of color and women need to have their voices amplified. However, before I continue, I'll need to expand some of the glaring issues in the opposition's case. The opposition has come up with the idea that it's important that we discuss literature with gender roles because then we can reflect on the negative influence. However, in our model, we are banning the use of literature that supports gender roles, not literature that depicts or criticizes them. So we can definitely still have explore how gender roles are in text, as long as the texts are explicitly showing the negative influence that they can have. And we're not trying to prevent the discussion and education around gender roles at all, just the opposite. We think it's vital for children to recognize and critique gender roles. We're just ensuring that the children are recognizing them as a negative structure that oppresses rather than normal roles that should be upheld. By banning literature that reinforces gender roles, we are ensuring that impressionable children are not taking away the wrong message from literature they're studying at school. They've also stated the fact that these books have themes that are relevant today, and we agree that these books are relevant today, yet we can learn about these themes in a way that explicitly expresses their harm. And there are so many important pieces of literature which do not include the support of traditional gender roles. So we believe that the important message is that some of these retired classics can be found and explored in other works. They also bring up the idea that these books are often studied for the techniques rather than the message. However, we say that regardless of whether the themes are explicitly being explored, students still recognize and internalize the messages that are being presented. So then wouldn't it just be better then that we can study inclusive and current books that simultaneously explores these themes whilst making sure that students take away a good message. They also stated the fact that our model is detrimental because it removes how far humanity has come and the importance of comparing. However, we are not comparing all books that include gender roles. We're just removing the ones that affirm these gender roles and reinforce them. And now I would like to continue on my substantive matter. By banning books that reinforce traditional gender roles, we are simultaneously instating more current or inclusive books that represent the values and perspectives seen in today's world. For example, The Angel in the House is a very old literature written by a white male that does not represent the current views and experiences seen today. Simply by getting rid of books with traditional gender roles, which are most commonly written by outdated white males, we will be able to showcase the works of women and people from various different cultures, as they are most likely to be criticizing these oppressive systems. This will in turn affirm to today's youth the diversity is present in the world as they can see it in the literature they read. By implementing current books from a diverse range of authors, our children will become aware and understanding of the diverse opportunities that are available to men, women, and people from all different cultures alike. This will increase inclusivity, and they will now be more accepting of the LGBT community, as these gender norms will not be so harshly instilled into our youth. This will also enable the children to hear the perspectives of previously suppressed voices, such as people of colour and Indigenous Australians. By dealing with misogyny, we are simultaneously increasing the representation of various different cultures.
Okay, I thank the second affirmative for her speech, and I now call on the second negative speaker to continue this debate.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. In the affirmative's perfect world, students will read books in schools that are not promoting gender stereotypes and that show support to female rights rather than go against it, and that students will still learn correct morals. However, how are students able to form their own opinions if they haven't been exposed to authentic literature that shows how women were viewed? If students see how women were previously viewed, then they can form their own morally correct views on why this is wrong and how our society has developed, which is what our aim as the negative team is. Before I move on to my substantive, I would like to point out some flaws in the opposition's case. So,
The first question that we are responding to is how can we gain important lessons from these books? So the opposition stated that we can learn the correct lessons in books other than these traditional texts because we are not taking away from what they are learning, but instead educating them in a more controlled and safer way. They are only removing books that affirm gender roles, not all books with gender roles. I have three main responses to this. Firstly, if we only teach about books that have a progressive view, how are we meant to show the societal progression and historical comparison? Secondly, it's not going to have the same impact on their learning by watering down the content. We agree in the merits of teaching books that don't have these traditional stereotypes, but they would be more effective in something like a comparison to show the harmful nature of these stereotypes. Thirdly, the context is a more important part of learning about stereotypes and their origins. The progressive and future-forward books the opposition is suggesting we use does not leave as deep of an impact. It is quite the surface level when it comes to dealing with these stereotypes by simply explaining how the stereotypes are bad rather than showing what it actually was like in the past. Another question that was raised was how does this impact amplifying the voices of minority groups? So the opposition stated that we can show perspectives of women from different cultures and minority groups who are against mistreating women, and we will learn better lessons from this. So firstly, these books are modern selections because many of these groups are kind of recently developed or such as LGBTQIA groups. This is more of a recent concept, so it's not actually giving us the full scope of how women were treated. And secondly, it shows how much campaigning has gone into getting the rights of women rather than showing us how it was authentically. It gives us a perspective of how, they went against stereotypes, but it doesn't show what it was like before that. It more just shows them as the prominent figures rather than the background figures and how they would have actually been treated. So therefore, it does not actually teach us the important lessons. Now onto my substantive. Firstly, on how exposing students to this literature in a controlled environment poses future benefits. Sexism and gender-based stereotypes are things that inevitably children will have to grow up facing. In the future, past school, they will face these issues and how they deal with it depends on the foundation of their beliefs which they develop during their educational journey. Breaking down this point, it is vital that children learn about things like equality and the breaking down of traditional gender stereotypes so that they are not constricted by negative perceptions of the world and gender. By banning books that feature these ideas, you are taking away the ability to learn and develop positive ideas. The literature we are referring to is often steeped in rich context. The stereotypes are not the focal plot of the literature, but instead things that shape the world. Because of this clear authenticity, children are able to delve into the books and explore the world whilst analysing and forming ideas and opinions supported in a controlled environment, which ensures the harmful ideas are discussed and broken down. Furthermore, schools make it a part of the curriculum to spend time analysing the traditional gender, race, and class stereotypes and teach students critical thinking so that they don't grow up thinking the values presenting in the books are an accurate reflection of society or what it should be. Rather than leaving children to walk into society and get bombarded with sexist stereotypes about what men and women can and cannot do, children learn about equality and how the outdated traditional stereotypes within these books should not be taken to heart. Next, from being exposed to this literature in a controlled environment, it teaches students good moral conduct, which is essential to take with them for the rest of their lives. While it may be implied that women are capable of doing whatever they want with their lives, it is not a lesson that can be learned from basic claims and the current stance of society. People should have a true understanding of the reasons women have these rights now ingrained into their minds. Following what the majority say or listening to your parents should not be the way an opinion is formed for someone, especially considering high schoolers who are beginning to notice the effect of previously formed opinions of stereotypes. As students, their brains can take in the new information and therefore form their own correct morally opinions. I am proud to negate.
I thank Second Negative for her speech, and I now invite our third affirmative speaker to conclude the affirmative team's case.
Good afternoon. This afternoon, I would like to address two main clashes that have been seen in this debate. So firstly, is how will students' views on gender roles be impacted by our model? So firstly, the opposition has stated that Australia is a society that actively rejects gender roles, and this is being reflected in our literature. We do agree that Australia has certainly come a long way in terms of equality. However, we do have a long way to go. Gender-based violence is a massive issue, and gender roles are very much upheld in our society currently. In addition, there is no guarantee that educators are explicitly going to express this to the students, that these ideas that are being presented in these texts are actually harmful. They may just be studying the techniques or other themes in the book, whilst not actively ensuring the students understand that this is bad. The opposition has also stated that we are currently taught to combat these gender norms. However, we believe that from a primary school age in Australia, these gender roles are seen in every single book that is read to them in class. And even if the teachers aren't affirming these roles, or even if the book doesn't affirm these roles, the mere lack of diversity of culture and opportunities for all gender prohibits these children from becoming understanding of today's diverse world. As if this is all they're seeing in all their classes, what else are they going to think? They are not going to be exposed to the different opportunities and the different experiences and perspectives that are seen in today's world. The opposition has stated that our model will be detrimental because it removes how far humanity has come. However, we are not removing all books that include these gender roles, but removing books that affirm these gender roles, as we have outlined several times. We're going to read books that critique these gender roles to show students about how these books are wrong. The negative team has continuously ignored this key aspect of our model, as we have defined in first that we will still be looking at books that reinforcing that these gender roles are not good. So the opposition has stated that students will not be able to gain an in-depth understanding of how gender roles affect women because of their lack of context. We believe that this is factually false. Books that are affirming gender roles tend to romanticize and support oppression that women face. For example, a woman will be depicted as relishing her domestic role and submissive role to her husband. She will be shown as dutiful and doting on her husband. Thus, students are given the idea that gender roles improve women's quality of life, and will give them a form of purpose. However, it is usually only the texts that are actively showing the harms of gender stereotypes and giving a realistic views of how gender works. Now onto my second clash, is will we still be able to learn these gender norms elsewhere if we eliminate these books? So the opposition has stated that teachers are able to expose the children to how to move forward in the future. We believe that teachers can indeed point out the harmful nature of these stereotypes, but most often teachers are focused on highlighting techniques and themes. In today's world, we can obviously see that there's a large gap in the diversity of literature that has been reflected and this is reflected in the current portion of society that is still believing current gender roles. We can see especially some of the older generation that had only very stereotypical gender roles. These were the only books they read and these were the only books they had in their classes. We can see the detrimental effects this has had on them because this part of society is still very much stuck in the past. So if we want to change this from the root of the source, we're going to have to change this from the beginning. The opposition has said that it will desensitize the students from these issues and it'll undermine the importance of how far these women have come. As we've continuously stated, we will still look at books that criticize these gender norms. But also, if we are trying to show how far these women have come, if we are showing that in today's world that we have completely eradicated these gender norms from society, it is showing how much these women have fought for if they have now come to a place where we can realize, and if the government realizes how important it is that we don't have these books in class anymore, the children can learn that, oh, these people have done so much work to get these gender roles out of schools. If we continue to have these in schools, then it's going to look as if to children that these women have achieved nothing. The opposition has stated that there will be no comparison, and the opposition and the children won't be able to see comparison from the progression of how far we'll come. However, we say that we are still allowing books for that time to reflect and criticize these values. For example, Porphyria's Lover by Robert Browning, which was written in the 1800s, which would talk about women's experiences in the past, so we will have comparison. This describes the patriarchy,
your time has
use of
expired.
dramatic irony. For these reasons, we are proud to affirm.
I thank Third Affirmative for that speech, and I now invite Third Negative to conclude this debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, in today's debate, we as the negative have to prove that these books do not actually have the so-called impact the opposition claims they do have on children, and that we do actually lose important lessons if we were to ban these books. So I'm going to analyze this under two themes. The first theme of what do we lose by banning these books, and the second theme of what the impact of children if they were banned. So under the first theme of what do we lose if we banning these books. So the opposition said that they promote outdated and offensive gender roles, and we should not be teaching this to children. So we have three main responses to this. My first response is that we think that the opposition has come up with an assertion, as we can still observe and learn from diverse books without taking away any of the current literature that is already studied. We've already discussed why books, even if they are affirming gender roles, can still be criticized in class by teachers and by their peers. And we still think that this is already what is happening in the status quo and should not need to be argued further. However, we can also find inclusive books to promote in the library, to recommend, to occasionally study in the curricula, which is what we already do. We occasionally study books from other diverse writers. However, we should not need to take away space from these other very important and classic pieces of literature. My second response is that we think the opposition has, we'd like to characterize these books. So we think that these books are usually written in certain contexts, like historical times, time periods where these books were just simply communicating the stereotypes at the time, because they were written at a time where these thoughts were very common and these beliefs were accepted. For example, in To Kill a Mockingbird, where the main character Scout is continuously blamed for not being like a proper woman. However, no one ever reprimands her for it. But this book also teaches us many lessons about gender, racism, and society at the time, and it obviously does contain very essential lessons that we should study and we should learn about, even if it does affirm certain gender roles and may be seen as slightly controversial. My third response is that we can't get the same things from modern literature. So we believe that the unique features of this literature is that it was written in times that were shaped by certain perspectives. For example, To Kill a Mockingbird or many plays of Shakespeare. However, if we were to pick modern books, they will not be written in the same type of context, and rather it would just come off as an insincere attempt to showcase traditional gender stereotypes and then try and reprimand it. However, we should not avoid the pure form of this literature, as the most important lesson is that the society, community, and times we live in shape our perceptions of these things, as these gender stereotypes not formed by themselves, which is why we need to study this original classic literature that does affirm gender stereotypes to properly learn about it, like my first speaker has already stated. So in this theme, I've concluded that we are both losing the opportunity to learn about the origins and impacts of traditional gender roles, and also losing a lot of other classic literature that teaches other important lessons, but contains gender roles that make them banned. Now onto my second theme of the impact on children if they were banned. So the opposition has said that these books can shape our lives and may be bad for very impressionable children. So we have three main responses to this. My first response is that we think that they've mischaracterized the way that these children learn in schools. So we think that when we read books, we always analyze them from a critical perspective. So while the book itself can be affirming to certain traditional gender roles, as long as the teachers actively comment and criticize on these themes, such as gender, which we already see happening in the status quo, we do not have to worry that these students will fall down the path because their schools are, for some reason, affirming these gender roles that is really not true. My second response is that we think that gender stereotypes are not formed by reading books in class. Just because a student has read Romeo and Juliet one time in class, it doesn't mean they will suddenly go out and follow the exact same things. We think that rather it is more likely that they are formed because they don't understand the proper context of how these gender stereotypes are formed in the first place, because they're not getting enough exposure to these issues, and they subconsciously develop these stereotypes because they're simply not aware. My third response is that it is worse for these students to grow up and encounter these books because they've been spoon-fed all these books that explicitly explain why all these stereotypes are bad and never learn how to analyze it for themselves, which is why they might be more susceptible to gender stereotypes in the future. Due to explaining these above themes, I'm proud to negate. Thank you.
I thank Third Negative for her speech. So what's going to happen now, I believe, is the panel will move into a breakout room where we will go over the debate and discuss our thoughts, and then we will come back and deliver the result of the debate to all of you. Let me see. Okay. Won't be a second and we'll get a breakout room set up, but Well done, everyone, on a great debate. Hi, everyone. I'd like to firstly start by congratulating both teams on a fantastic debate. We thought that it was a very challenging topic that both teams engaged with very well. There's high quality of this debate, testament to the fact that you're all very talented speakers, and this was a debate. It's a grand final. You all spoke very, very well, and you should all be very proud of your performance throughout this whole tournament over this weekend. So I'm going to start by giving a few pieces of general feedback, as always, and then I will explain the decision. So the three pieces of general feedback. The first was that this debate could have benefited from more examples. There were some examples which were really great, but I think it would have been really good to hear what specific books, with every point, specific books that maybe we were talking about in those instances. Because I think that whilst there were some examples, some points went without examples, and it would always be great to have more, and also more varied examples. So it's like both teams kind of had their favorite example to talk about, and it would be good if we had a bit, maybe a bit more variety in terms of the books being referenced. The second thing would just be to contextualize a little bit more on maybe what gender norms or stereotypes we're talking about, and like the values or perspectives that kids have, and how this is being influenced, to set up where you guys thought the starting point was, and then what the change was that you were hoping to see on AF, or like what the world was like more on negative and why that was okay. So I think just contextualizing a little bit clearer throughout the debate. And the final thing is that, and this is connected to the example, but it would have been great to have a really clear depiction on both teams of what you thought maybe like the perfect English curriculum was, because at times it was like, okay, AF's not happy with it. Neg seemed to also say that there were things that could be done differently, and there were books that we should be studying. So it would be like, okay, on both sides, what would be your ideal curriculum, and what do we want to see? And if we're getting rid of books, why are we getting rid of them? And that sort of thing. Just so it was really clear what the starting point of all teams were going into the debate. It would have added a little bit more clarity for the panel. Okay, that being said, this was a very high quality debate. The panel agreed on the decision, but we also agreed that it was a close debate and that it was very high quality. So that being said, there were two issues that we thought sort of decided the debate. The first was that what impressions do children get from reading books that have these like gender norms or traditional gender roles in them? And the second was, what would affirmatives change do to the English curriculum as a whole? So the first is, what impressions do reading books about traditional gender roles have on children? Affirmative set out, the general gist of the affirmative case is you read these books and kids sort of internalize their messages, and that therefore when you read books that sort of glorify or support the depictions of women as being like meek and submissive, you suggest that that is good or acceptable, and that kids internalize those messages. Neg tell us conversely that no one studies these texts in a vacuum, that when you're studying these books, you're having a critical discussion with your classmates and your teacher, so that you aren't just reading and internalizing, but rather you are reading and critiquing. Affirmative tell us that, like, regardless of when you read these, when you read traditional texts that have these perspectives in them, you sort of can't help but internalize them. And also that it sets up not only maybe perceptions of women as submissive, but also they might be a very like white version of literature, or a particularly heteronormative depiction of literature and like of the world, and that's not a good thing. Negative tells us that that isn't something that kids are going to internalize, because they have like the world around them more broadly, where like they know that that's not true, and that they study these things. They have like critical discussions in class where they're able to sort of critique and understand the text in their context. The other thing is that negative tells us very clearly that all of these texts are written within their context, that they're not necessarily written with the intention of glorifying a gender role, but rather they are depicting, the books are a product of their time, and that therefore they are just depicting what is like quite a, at the time, accurate depiction of family life, and that these have like historical value in that context, and that kids understand that and are taught that. So at the end of that first issue, I think Affirmative agreed the panel agreed and understood the Affirmative's argument that there are gender stereotypes depicted, but we didn't accept that kids were going to fully internalize those messages. And we agreed that Negative were able to suggest that there was enough context and critical discussion that goes into this like learning environment to ensure that kids aren't just like reading and internalizing these messages, rather that they are having a broader understanding of these texts in their historical context. Okay, so the second question then is, what would Affirmative's model do to the English curriculum as a whole? Affirmative's benefit here, and this is a big part of their case, is that as a result of this, we will have more texts that are maybe written by or share the perspectives of people who exist in other like minority groups, because they're saying when you like get rid of all these other old traditional texts, you replace them with other stuff. They say that we'll probably hear more voices of people of color and LGBT people and like other minority groups whose stories we don't really hear that much. Neg have a couple of responses. The first was that Neg concedes that it would be good to hear more of these stories, but they say that we don't need to get rid of a huge amount of our curriculum to do so. Rather, we can vary the curriculum, and that is something that actually is already starting to happen, and kids do study a range of texts. They also tell us that the benefit of studying these texts side by side is really good, because that's where you get to be comparative, so that it's a really good thing if you can study some old like classic novel when you can study it alongside something much more modern, because that's how you sort of compare and measure progress. Whereas when you remove that, they tell you that we sort of forget. Maybe they tell us that it sort of diminishes or maybe disregards history and suggests that in the past things weren't that bad because we're not studying texts that show what that history was like. The other thing that Negative tells us, and the panel thought this was like quite persuasive, although I'll note that the clearest example we had was from Third Negative. It would have been nice to hear it a bit earlier. But the example they give us is of To Kill a Mockingbird, and how that's one of a number of books they tell us that have important lessons and values in them that you would get rid of if you had to get rid of books that reinforce gender roles. And they give us the example of To Kill a Mockingbird and Scout, and how regardless of whether or not it affirms gender roles, it does a very good job of depicting and teaching children about racism and the civil rights movement in the United States, and that's a huge benefit there. Okay, so I've done a lot of talking. So at the end of this, what did we think? The panel thought that whilst Affirmative presented a world that said that kids were going to internalize these messages and that we needed to like overhaul the English curriculum in order to fix sort of these messages that maybe kids had, we thought the Negative were able to prove that because of the way that discussion happens very like critically, and also the fact that we could always just add other texts to our studies that do broaden kids' curriculum horizon without getting rid of these texts that have important historical context. In what we thought was a very close and high quality debate, we have awarded the debate to the Negative team from Pymble Ladies College. Congratulations to all speakers, and good luck with your future debating endeavours. Thank you.
On behalf of Roseville, I'd like to congratulate Pymble. You guys were really amazing debaters, and you really challenged us, and we learnt a lot from debating against you guys. I also would like to thank the adjudicators and the coordinators of this festival for putting a lot of time and effort into organising this event. Thank you.
From Pymble, we want to say a huge thank you to Roseville. Thank you for the debate. It was really challenging. Thank you for this entire experience. A huge thank you to the adjudicator and the chairperson for of course, conducting this debate, and thank you to everyone else who's been organising everything.
Thank you.
Righto.